All right, in this lesson we're going to give a brief summary of the arguments in Book 1 of the Republic. And I say brief, it will probably not seem brief, but based on how much is really contained in these arguments, it will actually be quite brief comparatively to that. So bear with me, there's a lot here, but I've done a significant amount of work to simplify it and make it more concise for you. So let's begin with Cephalus. So in Book 1 of the Republic, we get many attempts at defining justice. And the first one we get is from Cephalus. He says that justice is telling the truth and repaying what one takes from another, or repaying what one owes to another. And Socrates says, wow, that's an amazing definition that you've given, being kind of, facetious, and then says, well, what about this? If I borrow a weapon from a friend and then they subsequently go crazy, go mad, become enraged or something like that, is it just for me to give them back the weapon when they're in this crazed state? Or if someone is, malicious, has a malicious intent, is it just for me to tell them the truth in all situations? Or would it be better for us to not tell them the truth? So if someone's crazy and they say, I'm going to come into your house and kill X, Y, or Z person, are they home? Is it just to tell this person, yes, they're home, when you know that what they're going to do is harm them? This is the kind of argument that Socrates gives back to Cephalus, and Cephalus just folds. He just gives up. And so Polemarchus jumps in and says, you're not correct, Socrates, in saying that justice is not repaying one's debts just because you've given this counter argument. And Cephalus says, you know what, Polemarchus, take over for me. I'm going to go back to sacrificing to the gods. So that's really what you get with Cephalus. It's a very short argument, and it's not very complicated. But one of the underlying ideas here about Cephalus, we touched on this in the previous lecture, is that for Cephalus, money is not good because it's able to provide luxuries and pleasures. So Cephalus says, I don't care about, these bodily pleasures and the things of luxury. The only good that I get from my money is the fact that I can keep sacrificing to the gods and pay back what I owe to them. So Polemarchus takes over the argument. He inherits it. So here we have this play on the word inherit. This gets at the idea of the horse race. So we have the first pass of the torch, if you will, from Cephalus to Polemarchus. And also, this father-son relationship, he's inheriting what his father had created. His father created this problem. And let's see now how Polemarchus is able to be a steward of that inheritance. And spoiler alert, he does even worse than his father. It gets to an even worse point in the argument, in which time someone else comes and takes up the torch, namely Thrasymachus, and it gets even worse in his leg of the race. So this torch race is getting progressively worse. So Polemarchus says, justice is giving what is owed or what is appropriate to others. Socrates starts to dismantle this in a new way. He says, okay, so it must be to harm one's enemies and help one's friends. And he says, well, is there any kind of knowledge required for this thing to happen? Is there a certain skill which makes someone suitable to deciding these things? And Polemarchus says, yeah, that's what justice is. Justice is the ability to know who your friends are and who your enemies are so that you can appropriately give to each of them what is due to them. And Socrates is like, when is there a time that is what you want? Because if I want to improve a horse, I go to someone who has a skill in breeding horses. When I want to heal someone who's sick, I go to a doctor. When do we have this person who just generally does this without it being any particular kind of skill? And Polemarchus says going to war and in taking sides. So here we have this idea that justice comes about in war. So then Socrates says, well, what about when there's not war? Does the just person become useless when there's no wars going on? Or is it also useful in peacetime? And Polemarchus says, yeah, justice is also useful in peacetime because it helps us with finances and with saving money. So the just person is someone who knows when it's right to pay and when it's right to withhold money. And Socrates says, well, if we don't use money when we're saving it, then the just person is someone who is actually useless, because justice is useful when we're not using anything. If we're not spending any money, then what do we need a just person for if they're just holding the money and not spending it? And Polemarchus is like, I don't know what you're talking about. That's not what I meant. And Socrates digs in even further. He says, justice, if this is the case, then justice will be a knowledge of when to repay, so when to give and when to withhold money. And someone who's good at giving things and withholding them will also be good at stealing. And so the just man will be someone who's good at stealing, because they'll know at the right time when to steal from other people. And Polemarchus says, I no longer know what I mean, but I know that what you're saying is wrong. And so then Socrates comes in again and just goes on one of these tangents again. He says, don't people need knowledge of who is a friend and who is an enemy if they're going to give what is appropriate to each? And Polemarchus agrees. And he says, if just people help and unjust people harm, then it's never just to punish by harming someone. So the idea here is that just people are going to give benefit to those who they interact with. It's not the quality of someone who's just to make people worse. And he says harming someone makes them worse. So if someone is unjust and you harm them, you can't make them anything except for worse. So the just person can't possibly be harming their enemies. That's the idea here. Socrates is breaking down that part of the argument. So basically, the parts are this. The just person needs to have knowledge if they're going to give someone what is owed them. There has to be a kind of expertise or skill. So that's the first point. The second point is that harming someone makes them worse. And from these, Socrates concludes that it's never just to harm anyone, and that the only way to be just is to benefit people, to make them better, and to bring about their education and their betterment. So in this exchange with Polemarchus, we start from a definition of justice which is wrong, which is incorrect. And Socrates, through cross-examining it and through giving counter-examples, is able to indicate something about the truth of the matter. He's able to show that what is justice? Well, it's going to have to be something like benefiting people and making them better. So that's what we get with Polemarchus. Thrasymachus next. So after that whole exchange, Polemarchus more or less agrees and says, you know what, Socrates, sure, I'll agree with you and I'll say that that's true. And then Socrates says, does anybody else know anything about this? And then Thrasymachus bursts in and attacks Socrates He says that he sprang on him like a wolf and attempts to devour him or attack him. He says, Socrates, you're a charlatan, meaning someone who, like a snake oil salesman or something like that. You're a fraud. And you come around here pretending like you know things, and but then once people ask you questions, you won't give answers to them in a straightforward way. And he says basically, Socrates, you deserve to be punished for the way that you're acting. And he makes fun of Socrates basically and attacks him on these points. And he says, you deserve a punishment. And Socrates says, well, my proper punishment, if what you say is true, you say that I'm ignorant, well, then you should educate me. And you, who clearly, think that you know things, you're a sophist, you teach that you know things, well, your job should be to educate me. And Thrasymachus says back to this, no, I only teach people if they pay me. If you want to hear what I think justice is, you're going to have to pay me. And Socrates says, I'm poor, I can't afford that. And the people around say, we'll pay for Socrates. So they end up actually giving Thrasymachus money to join into the conversation here. So just a brief side note on the significance of that, Socrates says, I enter in these conversations for the sake of the betterment of the other person, and I don't charge money for it. And Thrasymachus, on the other hand, doesn't care at all about the betterment of the other person, only cares about his own interest, only cares about his own advantage in the situation. And that's made directly, symbolized directly in this way by him refusing to talk without being paid. So once Thrasymachus starts to get into what he thinks it is, he says, justice is what is the advantage, it's what is to the advantage or what is in the interest of the stronger. And then he goes on to clarify this a little bit. He says, by stronger, I mean the government. I mean whoever is in charge, whoever makes the laws, whoever organizes the city. And he says that they always enact laws in their own self-interest. And he says this is the case in all kinds of government. We have aristocratic, oligarchic, timocratic, democratic, all of these different forms of government. So he says in each case, their interest is different. They each have a different interest. They each, the interest of each is defined by the kind of government it is. So an oligarchic ruler has an oligarchic interest. And the same for the other forms of government. And so this idea will be developed later by Socrates. So Socrates does agree with some kind of thread of this. But the way that Thrasymachus paints it, Socrates will reject vehemently, as we're about to see. So he says this, that justice is whatever is in the interest of whoever is in control. And Socrates says, but couldn't they be wrong? Couldn't the rulers make laws that are actually not in their own self-interest? And here we get this whole interjection with Cleitophon, and we'll look at this on the next slide. But basically, the outcome of this interjection is that Thrasymachus says, no, I don't mean that a ruler is a ruler when they're making mistakes. So a ruler is acting in self-interest and making laws only when they succeed. So they are stronger if they are capable of actually ruling. So if they're capable of making laws that actually benefit themselves. So he says that a doctor is not a doctor if they make mistakes. They are only a doctor when they succeed. And so this is Thrasymachus' reply back to Socrates. And it's based on this reply that Socrates is able to show the inconsistency in Thrasymachus' argument. So he says, Socrates says, there must be an expertise, a kind of skill of knowledge of knowing what is in their advantage. So there must be some kind of political science. There must be some underlying rational structure to the world and to human life, and the political science must be a grasp of that. And so if someone's going to be a ruler, they're going to have this political science. So this is what Socrates will use to tear down Thrasymachus' argument. But for now, put that to the side. Thrasymachus continues with his own vision of justice and injustice. And what we find here is that Thrasymachus really has, at the heart of things, only grasped the nature of injustice. But he has grasped it incorrectly. He doesn't know that he understands it properly. But actually, Thrasymachus is a perfect example of what injustice is and gives us a kind of blueprint to understand injustice. So he says, justice is the advantage or interest of the stronger, while injustice is more advantageous for oneself. So the idea here is you're in a government, they have certain laws. Injustice is, instead of giving up my own rights to the government, instead of being obedient to the people in power, I go against what they say and take advantage of people in the meantime. So let's say that it's illegal, for instance, to charge interest on a loan. And that's something that was actually common in many Greek cities. You're not allowed to be charging interest like a loan shark in these things. Well, if you can do that, if you can get away with breaking the law in that sense, you're going to be able to take advantage of people, and you're going to be able to get more money out of the situation. So in this case, injustice is someone like Thrasymachus being able to take advantage of other people. And he basically says injustice is the greatest good, and the tyrant is someone who succeeds in basically holding everyone in a city captive, right? They're like a king, except they overthrow whatever government there was, and they hold people captive under threat of violence. So I'm in charge, and if you rebel against me, I will crush whoever you are and whatever rebellion you're starting. So the tyrant is someone who uses violence in order to be in control of the city. And so the tyrant is basically someone who is violent against everyone, or who is unjust against everyone. And he says, Thrasymachus says, this is what injustice is. Socrates is this milky-eyed idealist trying to pretend like justice and virtue are real, but really the greatest thing in the world is to be unjust. Everyone wants to be a tyrant. Everyone wants to take advantage of each other, and that's what the good is. And then Thrasymachus tries to leave and just leave the conversation. That's what it is. Don't try and argue with me. I'm out of here. And then they have to stop him and say, hey, wait. Let's analyze what you just said. You just dropped this like massive idea on us. Let's have a conversation about it. So then Socrates tries to break down this idea of Thrasymachus. He says, all expertise, all skills, all knowledge work by the stronger having the advantage over the weaker as their aim. This idea is inconsistent, right? So this is shown clearly in a couple of examples. Does the doctor work as a doctor in order to take advantage of the patient? Is the doctor a doctor insofar as they try and swindle the patient and get money out of them? Or is a doctor when they heal? Obviously, the second is the answer. So the art of being a doctor, the skill, the expertise, is not about taking advantage of someone weaker than you. It's about taking care of someone weaker than you. So the stronger is actually the servant of the weaker. And what is just and what is good in the case of doctoring is that the doctor submit themselves to the needs of the patient, not the other way around. So that's the first thing he brings up that starts to break down this idea. The second is that no one willingly rules who is worthy of ruling. And this is an idea that comes up many times through the Republic, but the idea is basically that if someone wants to take advantage of political power, then they are going to grasp at political positions. They're going to be they're going to be putting their whole life into political ambition and taking over power. Versus someone who doesn't want to take advantage of other people. What are they going to want to do? Not have to, spend all their time concerned with the political life, which is extremely troubling and has a lot of, responsibility to it. So what Socrates is saying is that everyone who's grabbing at political power doesn't deserve it, and the people who aren't grabbing at political power will never be striving to get the political power. So the people who should actually be in charge must be forced to be the rulers. And that's something we're going to get at later. Socrates basically says that the punishment for being wise is to be forced to be a ruler. And the punishment for being ignorant is being forced to be educated. So in Socrates' understanding of justice, this is the idea underlying all of the Republic, is that if we're going to give out punishments and benefits, what the philosopher's punishment is being given political power. It's a very paradoxical point to end up in, but that's where he's getting at. So that comes up briefly here, and he then goes on to say that the greatest penalty is to be ruled by those who are unsuited to rule. So we live in societies where people who don't actually have the best interest, people who are not, analogous to a good doctor, they're not good rulers in that sense. They don't have the patient's interest in mind. Our greatest penalty in society is to be ruled by people like that, who don't have the best interest in mind. So basically, the greatest penalty is to be living in a tyranny. And a tyranny comes up when we don't protect the city from being taken over by people who want to take advantage of us. So then he basically says, do you think that the unjust will try to get the better of those who they are like or those who they are unlike? And the answer is that the unjust are going to try and take advantage of everyone. It doesn't matter if you're just or unjust. The unjust person tries to take advantage of everyone. And then the question is, what about the just person? Will they try to take advantage of people like them or people unlike them? And it turns out that the unjust person won't take advantage of anyone. The unjust person isn't trying to get the better of people like them or unlike them. They're trying to make everyone better, right? So at the heart of this, Socrates gets to the idea that if you're going to rule, you need to have knowledge of how to better the city, how to better the citizens, how to heal a city, and how to keep it in a healthy state. And in order to be able to achieve that, you have to have knowledge of the nature of human life and human affairs, and you have to have this skill. And so at this point in the argument, Thrasymachus blushes, and the blush is this sign that Thrasymachus realizes that he's someone who teaches rhetoric. He teaches an art, a skill. And a skill is something that permits you to do something, to actually be able to achieve something. It's a real, tangible quality of reality, even though it's not something like a physical object. But knowledge is a real condition of the person who has it. and has real consequences. And if justice is going to be, a way in which someone is skillful at understanding human relationships, then there's going to be something real in the just person, and taking advantage of other people and living against them and being constantly trying to take advantage of other people cannot possibly be the just life. And Thrasymachus has a insight about this in the moment when he blushes, and the blush, he can't help himself but to blush because he feels that inner truth. So in the midst of this argument with Thrasymachus, there's this interjection by Cleitophon, and I've already kind of explained what happened there. He basically says, I'm going to, restate Thrasymachus's argument and say what he said. I'm going to be a witness to him. And so Cleitophon plays the role of a witness. He gives an account of what Thrasymachus said, and it's almost as if they're on Thrasymachus is on trial, and that they're in a court, and that Cleitophon is acting as a witness to repeat back what Thrasymachus said. And what we get here is Plato is using a kind of metaphorical idea. It's a kind of mock of Socrates' trial. Thrasymachus takes the part of Socrates, and Thrasymachus is the reverse of Socrates. He's the absolute opposite of Socrates. So Socrates, in his defense speech, defends justice and gives this account of how his life is all about justice and how justice is the greatest thing. Well, Thrasymachus is doing the exact opposite. He says that injustice is the greatest good. So at many points we see parallels between these two accounts, and this is completely intentional by Plato. And Thrasymachus is a kind of mockery of Socrates. So he says, I'm being unfairly treated, I'm being misrepresented. Well, Socrates said something very similar in the Apology. He said, I've been being misrepresented for years by people who have said that I'm a sophist and that said I'm a natural philosopher and all these things. So Thrasymachus says he's being mistreated here. But what is the key idea here that Plato is giving us? Thrasymachus is mistaken about the most important thing. He thinks that the good is injustice and taking advantage of other people. And this is the most important question. What is the good? This is going to come up in our next module, but the good is this unifying aspect of reality and knowledge. Everything has a good, and that's what makes it be what it is. A horse is a good horse if you're able to ride it and if it's healthy and these kinds of things. Everything in life is interwoven with each other, aimed at uses and goods. And so the idea in the whole of kind of Plato's philosophy is that philosophy plays a certain role. It does something, works towards a certain end, a certain goal. It has a certain good of it. And Socrates exemplifies this in the just life of the philosopher, the way that the philosopher works towards justice. And so Thrasymachus is the antithesis of philosophy in this sense, or he is presenting us with the antithesis of philosophy. If Socrates is completely only cares about the good of the other person, is not trying to take advantage of them. He's not trying to make money out of their conversations. He's not trying to prove that he is right. So his justice is not to take advantage of people or to get anything out of the situation, but Socrates is kind of like a doctor who tries to heal the other person. And we could even say that Thrasymachus, in a way, is not believing in the gods and that he is corrupting the youth. So he doesn't believe that justice is real. Well, justice is one of the gods, and living a pious life means striving for justice. And so, in a sense, Thrasymachus is not believing in the gods, or at least not believing that it matters whether or not you act justly to the gods. And then corrupting the youth, well, Thrasymachus is a teacher, and he teaches people that injustice is the greatest good, and this is sort of the definition of corrupting the youth in terms of Socrates. Socrates' whole goal is to educate people towards justice and to strive towards virtue and self-betterment. And Thrasymachus is saying, no, what you should be doing is figuring out how to get away with the most injustice. And the last thing to mention here is that Thrasymachus says at one point, he says, well, here's Socrates. This is his wisdom. He doesn't teach anything and goes around learning from others only, but he isn't grateful for it. And in a weird, ironic way, actually, Thrasymachus is accurately describing Socrates. And Socrates says, I agree with you that I don't teach anything and that I do go around learning from other people, but I'm not ungrateful for it. I'm generous with my praise for people. I praise anyone who's giving me a account of the way things are. And so we see this already, like when he's talking to Cephalus and Polemarchus. They will give a definition. Socrates, doesn't agree with it at all, but he says, wow, thank you so much for giving me this definition. And then he, dismantles it, but he is kind of generous with his praise in those situations. But the idea basically is he's saying, oh, Socrates, and he's making fun of Socrates, you don't do anything, you don't have any wisdom, you don't teach anything, you just go around, but this is not true. Well, Socrates is saying, it is true. That is what my form of virtue is. So the final stage of Book 1, after Thrasymachus' back and forth, his cross-examination by Socrates, Socrates gives this refutation. He says that the unjust cannot be stronger because they are incapable of working as a team. What an unjust person does, is set things at variance which naturally agree with each other. So if the rulers have certain laws and justice is following those laws, then injustice will be disrupting those laws, setting at variance the things that agree with each other. And here we can think of the Dark Knight, the Batman movie. So in the opening scene of that movie, we see the Joker robbing a bank. And in the process of robbing the bank, at each stage, the first people come in, they take the money, and then they're going to load it up into a truck, and the person driving the truck kills the previous people. And then that happens at the next stage and the next stage. So everyone in the chain of committing this crime is being killed off by the next person in the chain. And so the idea here is basically these people are doing injustice, and they have to work as a team in order to get this done. But in order to work as a team, you have to treat the other people on the team with you justly. You have to work together. But that's precisely what they don't do in this. And so it really shows this level of injustice, right? So while there are like organized crime and stuff like that, you can easily be offed by someone for no reason, right? They can kill you off in order to take advantage of you. And so what Socrates is getting at is that if you're going to work in if you're going to work with other people to a common end, you're going to need to be just towards them. You're going to need to act in agreement with them. And the unjust person is going to be incapable of acting as a team because they're constantly going to be trying to overtake other people and get the advantage of the people who are on their team. So he says that the unjust are less happy, and so injustice cannot be more profitable. So the unjust are in this situation where they're constantly taking advantage of other people and people are taking advantage of them. There's no kind of team effort. And so they don't have that human community aspect in which they're able to work together with other people towards a common goal. And he says that basically, if virtue is something that makes you live well and the unjust don't have any virtue, then they can't be happy because they don't have this way of working towards a goal and accomplishing something. And therefore, being unhappy, is less profitable, and therefore the unjust person is actually less profitable than the just person. So he goes through this whole argument and gets to this point of, benevolence is the only answer, and the only way to be just is to do all of this. And Socrates says basically, I was being greedy, and I reached for the second course before I was ready. And what this means is that Thrasymachus was not ready to hear these things. So he blushed, as we saw, and he felt humiliated. And he showed that he was able to learn and to be taught, and that he genuinely understood that there is a upward path of education that's possible. And later, Socrates will even say that Thrasymachus became my friend at that moment. So the blush represents that they became friends insofar as Socrates was able to bridge the gap towards learning. But then Socrates gives this whole speech after that, after the blush. He gives this whole speech about the just life and about how to be happy and why injustice is incapable of bringing about happiness. And Thrasymachus says basically, oh, here you go, Socrates, have your fun. And Socrates says, you know what, you're right. I am being gluttonous. I'm being greedy. I've reached for the second course before it was allowed. And what he means is that he's being ironic here. He's being a little bit comedic. He's saying that you, Thrasymachus, were not ready to really hear the truth about the good life. And I went off on this whole speech, and I, was being kind of pompous about it. And had you been ready to hear it, it would have been suitable for you. But since it wasn't, I have kind of overstepped the bounds. And in order for Thrasymachus to be able to appreciate this, there are many more stages he has to go through in order to understand it.